Perfect moments. Emma's hands trembled on the steering wheel as she stared at the grocery store's neon sign, bile rising in her throat. The clock on her dashboard read 3:47 p.m. Just moments ago, she could have sworn it was 3:42. She pressed her forehead against the cool leather of the steering wheel, trying to ground herself in reality. She'd promised herself, after Mark, after the hospital, after the restraining order, after everything, that she'd never ignore the signs again. But David was different. David was perfect, and that's what terrified her most. Her therapist's words echoed in her mind. Trust your instincts, Emma. You've survived before. You know the warning signs. She'd stopped going to therapy 3 months ago. David thought it was holding her back. David thought a lot of things were holding her back, just like Jeremy had, just like Mark had. The bruises from Mark had faded years ago, but sometimes she still felt phantom pain, where he'd grabbed her arms, shook her, told her she was worthless until she believed it. Jeremy had been subtler. No physical marks, just careful manipulation, isolation, and constant criticism wrapped in concern. I worry about you, he'd say, while systematically destroying her self-confidence. She'd sworn she'd learned her lesson, sworn she'd spot the red flags next time. But David was perfect, too perfect. No angry outbursts to explain away, no subtle manipulation to untangle, no bruises to hide. Instead, there were these impossible moments, these time slips that made her question her own sanity. The proposal last month replayed in her mind like a broken record. David down on one knee in the restaurant. In one version, he dropped the ring, and it rolled under the table, his face contorting with a familiar rage she'd seen on Mark's face countless times before. In another, he knocked over a wine glass, and she saw that twitch in his jaw that reminded her of Jeremy before his concerned lectures. In a third, he stumbled over his words, and she made the mistake of laughing, the crushing pressure of his hand under the table feeling so real, so familiar, yet impossible to prove. But in the final version, the one everyone else saw, it was perfect. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone, opening the support group chat she'd hidden in a calculator app. Susan from group would understand. Susan had survived Richard, had recognized the signs in her own relationship, but Emma's thumbs hovered over the keyboard. How could she explain this? My perfect fiancé can control time sounded even crazier than her past attempts to explain Jeremy's gaslighting. A bitter laugh escaped her throat. She'd gotten better at spotting abusers, only to fall for one with supernatural powers. The universe had a sick sense of humor. The scars on her wrist, Mark's parting gift, itched as she reached for her journal in the glove compartment. She'd started documenting everything 3 weeks ago, just like her therapist had taught her to document Jeremy's manipulations. February 15th. David spilled coffee on his shirt before a meeting. I saw something in his eyes. Mark's rage, Jeremy's contempt, then reset, shirt clean, expression perfect. February 18th. Argument about dinner plans. First version, a flash of something familiar, that look men get before they strike. Second version, threats wrapped in sweet words, Jeremy's specialty. Third version, perfect loving boyfriend suggesting takeout. February 20th, watched him trip on stairs, saw his mask slip, saw Mark and Jeremy and every other man who tried to break me, all wrapped up in his perfect smile. Then didn't. Her therapist would call this pattern recognition, hypervigilance from past trauma. But Emma knew better now. The patterns were real. The danger was real. She'd learned to trust her instincts the hard way, paid for those lessons in blood and tears and years of recovery. A tap on her window made her jump and scream. Her phone slipped from her lap, and she caught it before it hit the floor. The time read 3:42 p.m. Emma's heart stopped. The dashboard still showed 3:47 p.m. This isn't real, she whispered to herself, pressing her fingertips against her temples until it hurt. She remembered saying these same words in Jeremy's bathroom, staring at her reflection, trying to convince herself she wasn't going crazy while he rewrote reality with his words. Now David rewrote reality itself. "Hey, beautiful," David said, sliding into the passenger seat. His smile was warm, loving, perfect, just like Jeremy's smile before he'd tell her she was being irrational. Just like Mark's smile before his fist would fly. Waiting long? She checked the time again. 3:42 p.m. Her stomach churned with familiar fear. No, she lied, forcing a smile while scanning his face for the subtle tells she'd learned to recognize, the slight tightening around his eyes that meant he'd reset recently, the too-perfect timing of his expressions. Just got here. Emma felt his hand reach for hers, and she let him take it, fighting the urge to vomit. His touch was gentle, loving. Everything about him was gentle and loving, now. But she remembered other versions of him, ghost memories of rage and violence before he would reset, try again, get it perfect. How many times had he hurt her and simply erased it? I was thinking about dinner tonight, he said. That new Italian place? Emma nodded mechanically, her mind racing. She'd been here before, not just with David, but with others. The public dates, the perfect boyfriend act, the careful manipulation of appearances. But David took it to a whole new level. He didn't just act perfect. He forced reality to make him perfect. Actually, she said, her voice small, I'm not feeling great. Maybe we could stay in? She watched his face carefully. There, a flicker of annoyance, quickly masked by concern. That same mask Jeremy wore when she'd tried to avoid public appearances. That same false concern Mark showed when she'd tried to stay home to hide bruises. Time skipped. As she drove home later, her mind raced with possibilities. She'd escaped before, from Mark's fists, from Jeremy's mind games. But how do you escape someone who could erase your every attempt? Unless... She remembered something from group therapy. Susan talking about her escape from Richard. The key is to create chaos. Abusers need control. When everything spins out of control at once, they can't maintain their perfect image. Emma's hands steadied on the wheel as an idea began to form. David could control 5 minutes at a time. But what if she created chaos that lasted longer? What if she overloaded his need for perfection? She began to plan. Emma spent 3 days testing her theory. Small experiments, careful observations, the kind of methodical documentation she wished she'd done with Mark before he put her in the hospital, the kind of pattern recognition she'd finally learned with Jeremy before she escaped. Her new journal, hidden inside a hollowed-out self-help book David had mockingly gifted her, contained her findings. Rule 1, 5 minutes maximum per reset. Rule 2, he remembers all versions, but ghost memories haunt everyone involved. Rule 3, multiple simultaneous events strain his control. Rule 4, digital timestamps show contradictions. Rule 5, he cannot resist imperfection. He must reset. The last rule was key. Like Mark's need to dominate, like Jeremy's compulsion to control narratives, David had a pathological need for perfection. But unlike her previous abusers, he had the power to enforce it. Almost. Emma looked at her phone. 8:57 a.m. Saturday morning. David would arrive at exactly 9 a.m., just like always. Perfect timing. Perfect boyfriend. Perfect prison. She touched the scar on her wrist, her reminder of survival. Trust your instincts, she whispered, her therapist's words becoming a prayer. The apartment was rigged like a chaotic symphony, waiting to play. 4 different alarms set on devices hidden throughout the rooms. 3 automated emails scheduled to different accounts. A precariously balanced glass of water by the bathtub. Her laptop opened to a video call that would auto-connect to her sister, the sister David didn't know she'd reconnected with through her support group. Time to add some imperfection to your perfect world, she murmured. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m. Emma took a deep breath, remembering how she'd faced Mark in court, how she'd finally stood up to Jeremy's manipulations. She could do this. Morning, beautiful, David said as she opened the door, leaning in for a kiss. His timing was perfect. His smile was perfect. His whole world was about to shatter. The first alarm went off. David's expression flickered, annoyance then calm. Want me to get that? No need, Emma said, just as the second alarm sounded from the bedroom. She watched his face, saw the micro-expressions she'd learned to recognize, the tightening around his eyes, the slight twitch in his jaw. Mark had similar tells before he'd explode. Jeremy's came before his gaslighting speeches. The third alarm started. The glass fell from the tub's edge. Her first scheduled email arrived, phone chiming. David's head snapped between the various sounds, his perfect composure cracking. What's happening? Life, Emma said, her voice stronger than she felt. Real life, David. Messy, imperfect, beautiful life. She saw him trying to focus, trying to choose which thing to reset first. The fourth alarm blared. Her second email arrived. The bath began to overflow. Stop it, he snapped, and she saw Mark's rage, Jeremy's contempt, every abusive man she'd ever known reflected in his perfect face. Just stop everything. Time skipped. The alarms were still blaring. Time skipped again. Water still spreading across the floor. I can fix this, he growled, his mask of perfection crumbling. I can fix anything. Emma stood her ground, even as her knees shook. 5 minutes, she said. That's your limit, isn't it? 5 minutes to make things perfect. But life isn't perfect, David. Life is chaos and mistakes and beautiful, messy moments that we can't control. The video call connected. Her sister's voice filled the room. Time skipped. Alarms still ringing. Time skipped. Water soaking his perfect shoes. What did you do? He screamed, and this time there was no reset. No perfect version to replace the ugly truth. She saw him fully now, not just the ghost memories of violence, but the real monster beneath the perfect surface. I set us both free, Emma said, picking up her packed bag from behind the door. Free from the exhaustion of being perfect. Free from the endless loops of trying to control every moment. You can't leave, he snarled, reaching for her with hands she'd felt around her throat in countless erased moments. But Emma had survived Mark's fists, had escaped Jeremy's mind games, had learned from every abuser who'd tried to break her. She was done being perfect. She pressed the final button on her phone. Every device in the apartment began ringing, chiming, alarming at once. The chaos was total, overwhelming, impossible to control in 5-minute segments. Goodbye, David, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I hope you learn to live with imperfection. It's the only way to truly live at all. She walked out into the morning sunshine, shaking but alive. Behind her, the alarms kept ringing, time kept flowing, and life kept happening in all its beautiful, imperfect glory. She checked her phone, 9:13 a.m., a single, unchanging moment in time. Through the window, she heard him screaming, trying to reset, to control, to perfect. But some things couldn't be controlled. Some things shouldn't be. As she drove away, Emma touched her scar again, her reminder of survival. Ghost memories of David's erased violence flickered through her mind, joining the real memories of Mark's abuse and Jeremy's manipulation. But this time, she was escaping before the worst could happen. This time, she'd trusted her instincts. Her phone buzzed with a message from her support group. Meeting tonight. You coming? Emma smiled through her tears. Yes, she typed back. I have a story to tell. She kept driving, leaving perfect moments behind for real ones, even if those real moments were messy, painful, or scary, even if they couldn't be reset or erased, even if they left scars. Because scars meant survival. And she was a survivor.